And welcome to the Road from Emmaus podcast. I'm Fran, and along with Kit, we seek to take our listeners on a guided tour of redemptive history, showcasing the beauty, splendor, and unity of God's amazing story of cosmic redemption, restoration, and renewal. We hope that a warm conversational tone and format make an unfamiliar topic for many and intimidating for some more approachable, accessible, and digestible, growing and edifying the body in the process. This is our 76th episode in our journey through the scripture series. We encourage you to start with episode 1, which is on our podcast, which you can find on YouTube under Road from Emmaus too. And we also encourage you to look at our website as well, roadfromemmaus.com, where we have a lot of great resources. And you can also find a direct link to our most current episode there. Jumping back in, building on this idea of conflict and victory, and really talking about how what Jesus is accomplishing is actually in direct conflict with the human expectations of the generation, but also the fact that he was inaugurating not only a new race, but a new realm of existence. And therefore, the victory that he was accomplishing did not look readily accessible, right? Or it didn't look the right way to his contemporaries. With that context in mind, Kit, how do Jesus' miracles over demons, nature, sickness, and death reveal the true battle he came to fight? And how does this expand the purpose of his mission beyond the restoration of Israel to the liberation and renewal of all creation?
Well, as we said last time, it's very common for Christians to just kind of think in terms of the gospel accounts showing us that Jesus is divine and through incarnation, he's sinless and that he lived a sinless life and therefore is a suitable substitute to die for sinners. And so really the only thing that we think the Gospels are concerned with is Jesus being conceived of the Spirit and being a sinless person, living a sinless life as the God-man, and therefore being able to die for sinners in a way that his righteousness can be imputed to them. And so everything that we see in these long gospel accounts beyond, the very beginning and the very end of those accounts, we tend to kind of scratch our heads and say, what's that all about? And is this just kind of filler, spanning us from birth to death on the cross? And that kind of way of thinking causes us often, as you said, when we look like at the miracles, the healings and the walking on water and the feeding of the multitudes and casting out demons and these various things, we want to say, okay, well, those are just ways in which Jesus is showing to the people of Israel that he's divine. Hey, see, I can do these miracles, therefore know that I'm divine. Again, working out of that lens of saying that's really what the issue is, a sinless God-man who can die on a cross. So all of these things that he's doing and saying are kind of filtered through that lens. And what we're saying is that that's really not the point. Jesus was born as the messianic servant promised by God as the inaugurator of his kingdom. In this kingdom, we keep talking about how to understand it, what it was really all about. This is that kingdom that God had been promising to the people of Israel, and it would come in the form of Yahweh's return to end the people's exile. We talked about the second Exodus the last time. And so he had sent his people away. He had put them under bondage, under captivity because of their covenant unfaithfulness. In other words, their sin, their unfaithfulness to the covenant had brought about their exile and Yahweh's own departure from them. Well, when he returned, he was going to forgive that sin. He was going to renew the covenant. He was going to free them from that exile that they had been subjected to and regather them back to himself. Well, in order to do that, he had to overthrow the conquering, enslaving power in a second Exodus, just like he had done with Egypt before. And we talked about how the Israelites of Jesus' generation associated that with the Messiah leading a revolution, a revolt, an army against Rome. He was going to overthrow Rome. That was the enslaving power. But ultimately, the issue that God's kingdom was going to deal with is it was going to overthrow the powers and the principalities that operate both in this world and in the unseen world, as in a contradicting, opposing kingdom. Jesus was coming to establish Yahweh's kingdom by conquering all of the powers and the forces and the realities of human existence and creational existence that oppose and contradict God and the order and intent that he had put in place. And if we could put it most simply, Jesus came to overthrow the curse on the creation, and in that way he would establish Yahweh's kingdom. So his works, his miraculous deeds have to be viewed through that lens. Whether he's showing authority over the chaos and dysfunctionality of the creation, the walking on the water and stilling the storm, kind of fighting or having authority over this chaos forces at work in the world, or casting out demons, or multiplying food, or healing the sick, or raising the dead. Those are ways in which he is showing that I came to overthrow the curse and its effects and its workings, this creational dysfunction, this creational discord, this creational death that has come upon God's good creation. And so he's showing that, again, his work is not just about saving human souls, but ultimately about liberating, healing, restoring, regathering the whole creation back to God. He's not just showing, see, I've got this power, I can do these things.
Sure.
Oh, see, I really am God. It's not that, because in some sense, those are even human functions, right? Ultimately, man's dominion over the earth is the exercise of God's dominion. And so man is the one who shows that authority and power over the creation and its operations and the things that characterize it. But anyway, that's probably enough said on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is the setting of Caesarea Philippi essential for understanding Jesus' conversation with his disciples? And how does this region's history of idolatry, pagan worship, and association with the gates of Hades deepen the significance of his declaration about his messianship, or messiahship?
Well, this is a familiar incident in the gospel accounts of this whole thing, of Peter as the rock, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the controversies that have come, the Roman Catholic position and the Protestant position on that. But this is a classic example of why historical understanding and even geographical understanding are important, because the only way to understand what's happening in that account in Matthew 16 at Caesarea Philippi is to understand that place and the history behind it. Jesus' disciples understood those things, and so they interpreted what he was saying to them through that lens. We, modern Western Christians or readers, we don't know that history. We don't know that geography. And so we're interpreting Jesus' words through our own lens. And so it just becomes this thing of how he's going to conquer the powers of hell, and hell won't be able to prevail over his church. And ultimately this will all be mediated through Peter. Jesus is going to build his church on Peter. And so the papacy and all of that. Well, that's all utterly foreign to what's happening in that context in Matthew 16. So why Caesarea Philippi? Well, the first thing is it's way north. It's well beyond the Galilean region where Jesus was doing his ministry. And so, a couple dozen miles north of the Sea of Galilee up in the northern regions of that area called Bashan, and some of our readers may be familiar with it. One of the regions that the Israelites had to go to war with these kings, Og, the king of Bashan, when they were coming south and getting ready to enter into the land. But it's a region that is north of the Sea of Galilee, and at the north of that, at the southern foot of Mount Hermon, which I believe is the tallest mountain in that region around Israel, there was this place, a kind of, a fertile terrace. It was a place with a huge rock escarpment, and it became it had a cave there with a stream a spring that flowed out of it. And it became a central place as kind of an oasis, very lush, very fertile, but a kind of a spectacular landscape too. Here at the foot of Mount Hermon is this massive rock escarpment with a grotto, a cave with a stream flowing out of it. And it had a very long history in kind of Canaanite lore and pagan lore. At the time of the judges, it was known as Baal Hermon. Mount Hermon was Baal Hermon. It was the mountain where Baal, the primary Canaanite god, a god associated with storms and other things, that was where he was said to reside. And later on, as the Israelites had conquered that, and then when the kingdom was divided, that area around there, that city that became Caesarea Philippi, was named Dan because of the tribe of Dan. And that's where Jeroboam the first established one of his two places of worship for the people of Israel in the north. He built two golden calves, an echo of what happened at the foot of Sinai with the Israelites. And he installed one at Dan and one at Bethel. And those became the sites of worship for the people of Israel. And they became emblematic of Israel's idolatry, their rejection of God. So that was that place, Caesarea Philippi, during the time of Israel's place there. And, when they settled the land. And then later, when the Greeks conquered, they established a temple there to their god Pan, the half man, half goat Greek god. And they built a temple there, a sanctuary there, a worship center there. And so that became associated with Pan. And then later, Caesar Augustus built a tribute to himself there. Well, how did it become Caesarea Philippi? Presided over that area, and he made Caesarea Philippi his capital, and he renamed it Caesarea Philippi. In other words, the city of Caesar where Philip reigns. But all of that history was that it was a notable pagan center of worship, a place of encounter with the gods and the powers. And especially they believed in that ancient world that the gods would go underground in the winter, and then they would, in a sense, come back out when the earth was reborn in the spring. And so this cave that was there, this grotto in this rock escarpment with the stream coming out of it, was believed to be an entry into the underworld where the gods would come back and forth through the river, through the water. And so it was a very holy site. It was a gate into the underworld. And when Jesus reuses that phrase, the gates of Hades, he's not talking about hell in our modern conception of it. Hades is just a way of speaking about the underworld, the realm of the dead, the realm where the gods preside over the dead. So that's what that place is all about. And Jesus takes his disciples there way out of the way on this long trek up there, because the setting in which he says what he says becomes very important to their understanding. And that encounter, or that, Jesus saying, I'm going to take you up, I'm going to take you to this place. And when we stand in this place, that's where I'm going to, in a sense, interact with you more clearly about who I am as the Messiah and what I came to accomplish and what will come out of this. And so that history and that geographical setting become very important in interpreting those statements of Jesus in that passage.
I think it just stamps the importance, Kid, too, is that we must understand, too, is that these letters, whatever we're reading, we are not the original audience. And so therefore we have to be mindful of our own cultural river, our assumptions, our lack of understanding for what historically is happening, because a lot of these critical things we are missing, and they actually misinform our own understanding of what is actually taking place as well. So
Right.
building on that, Kid, what does Jesus mean when he declared that the gates of Hades would not prevail against his church? And how would his disciples have understood this statement in light of the location where he made it, Kid?
Well, again, what we're doing is we're talking about Jesus manifesting of the kingdom in his ministry. And one aspect of that manifesting of the kingdom is interacting with this issue of conflict and victory.
Mm-hmm.
If he's inaugurating the kingdom of God, then he is entering into conflict with the existing kingdom of this world, the world as it operates under the curse, as it operates under the power of the Satan, as it operates, in alienation from God. You have the kingdom of God breaking into the kingdom of this world as it is and coming into conflict with it. And we pick this particular episode because this is an episode where we can see that conflict very clearly and the nature of it. Once again, Jesus is not coming to conquer Rome. He's coming to conquer the powers, the things that drive the curse, that operate within the curse, that define existence under the curse. And this place, more than any place for Jesus' disciples, would represent that. This was a place that had been unclean as a Canaanite center for the worship of Baal. And even when Israel came into the land, it became unclean as the site where Jeroboam established this idolatry, this practice of the worship of Yahweh away from Jerusalem, away from the tabernacle or the temple. So it was the site of Israelite idolatry. And then it became the site of, Greek pagan worship with this temple, there and the gods and the images set into this rock escarpment. And then even Augustus honoring himself there, and then, Philip honoring Caesar there. And it had just become this kind of epitomizing place of the world and its powers and its rulers that are in opposition to the true and living God, the God of Israel, the site of idolatry and paganism and opposition to God. And Jesus takes them to that place, and he now talks about his messianic identity and what it's going to be about. And, we may even want to just read those verses.
Yeah, and Kid, let me actually pull it up too. I can't too, and what is the specific passage, Kid? I'll grab it right now, and then we can go ahead and have that context. All right, so Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. This is Matthew 16 through 23. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and so others Jeremiah, one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. There's that phrase we just referenced. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Jesus predicts his death, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So to that, Kit, hopefully they give some additional context to speak to as well.
Yeah. And the reason I wanted you to read all the way through verse 23 is because Matthew intentionally puts those two things together. He has Jesus taking the disciples intentionally way north, all the way up, standing then at that place, Caesarea Philippi, which they recognize as epitomizing idolatry, epitomizing the place where the powers, the dark powers that rule the world, are operative. And he then asks them, "Who am I?" Well, you're the Messiah. Who is the Messiah? The Messiah is the son of David. The Messiah is the king of Israel. The Messiah is this coming, conquering king. While they're standing at this site in front of this massive rock escarpment with this grotto with a stream flowing out of it, this entrance into the realm of the dead, and all these idols and inscriptions on the wall of this huge rock escarpment, and Jesus says at that time, I will build my church as this Messiah, as this conquering king. I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. What they're hearing is, again, this triumph, this messianic triumph, is going to involve Jesus establishing a new people in and through whom, in connection with whom, he will himself triumph over all of these opposing, contradicting dark powers and the way they operate and carry out their dominion in the world. He will be overcoming all of that. Then immediately after that, so that's this great triumphal thing. And and he says to Peter, because Peter makes this declaration, this affirmation, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, I say to you, you are a stone, Petros, a stone, an individual stone. But upon this massive escarpment is the idea, not just a little stone, but a massive rock outcropping that would have caves in it, or you could carve tombs into, or whatever. You are this individual stone, Peter, this little stone. But on this massive escarpment, and they're standing in front of this massive thing, I will build my church. On this, over this, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. So this great triumph, even over all of these things that are against Yahweh's creation and Yahweh himself, these things that oppose him and his reign and his kingdom. But then now Jesus is telling them, okay, this great conquest, this great triumph that I'm going to accomplish, how's it going to come about? I'm going to be put into a place of humiliation and suffering and death. I'm going to die at the hand of the opposing powers that I told you at Caesarea Philippi I was going to triumph over. I'm going to die at the hand of these powers, even as they're operating through the unbelieving, unfaithful sons of Israel. I'm going to die at the hand of those powers. And this is what's shocking to Peter. And he says, no, Lord, we'll never let it be. You're the Messiah. You're the Messiah. Messiah is the king who triumphs by vanquishing these powers, not by dying at their hand. We'll never let this happen. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Now, he's not saying Peter's possessed or he looks like Satan or whatever, or the devil's taking him over. He's saying this is this contradicting, and the way he interprets it is you're thinking in terms of the way that men think. You're thinking according to the ways of men, the things of men, not the things of God. You're thinking wrongly. Your mind is thinking about these things in a way that reflects, again, the satanic deception or satanic distortion or the satanic contradiction. So again, the point of all of that Matthew is getting at is that Jesus is the kingdom bringer. He is going to establish the kingdom. He's come to confront and to gain victory over these opposing powers that hold the world in bondage, that hold the people of Israel in bondage. It's not going to be a battle against Rome. It's going to be a battle against, again, all these things that, in a sense, are represented by Caesarea Philippi and their presence there. But the way in which I'm going to achieve this great victory that will triumph over death itself is by giving myself unto death at the hands of those powers. I will conquer the powers by letting them do their worst against me. And this is this idea of that doesn't make any sense. This is not the way the Messiah is to come as the great conquering king. This doesn't look like conquest. This looks like the powers conquering you. So Jesus is trying to get them to understand how this is going to play out. And Peter, with his natural mind, is not getting it. And he's saying, no, we won't let them kill you. You're the Messiah.
Right.
You have to conquer. So anyway, this episode, the reason we wanted to talk about it is because it really is a very key and important and exemplary episode showing exactly the dynamic of how Jesus is going to bring the kingdom. What is the actual fight he came to fight? What is the actual enemy he came to conquer? And how will that triumph come about?
Right. We've actually spoken to number 4, Kit, too, just in various ways too. So I'm actually going to jump to number 5 as we close out the episode here.
Okay.
Why did Peter and the other disciples struggle to accept Jesus's explanation of how he would achieve victory, and how does their response illustrate the contrast between human expectations of power and triumph in God's kingdom, where death itself is defeated through the Messiah's sacrificial death? So this is really a capstone question, Kit, for essentially the last couple of episodes. To kind of put a bow on it, Kit, at the end of the day, what are the key things we should be walking away with around conflict and victory, essentially?
As we've said before, and this is a key theme that, once again, I think a lot of Christians tend to just brush over or they don't really catch, but a principle that Jesus emphasized over and over again through the things he taught, through the things that he did, and really reaching its climax in the upper room, where he's just one day away from this death at the hands of the opposing powers that he's been talking about and preparing the disciples for. And so that upper room episode is the most intensive final place of instruction, where Jesus really wants them to understand what his death is all about and how it is the manifesting of the operating of God's power over the opposing powers, that his death will be the way in which God triumphs. And what we've tried to emphasize here is that the kingdom of God is of a different sort altogether than kingdoms and kingships, rule, authority, as we know it in this world. And as I said before, it's true whether we're talking about a communist dictatorship or we're talking about a representative republic, in the sense that our Constitution has established here, a democratic republic or whatever. Human rulers and human kingdoms always operate according to a principle of power exercised ultimately for the good of and in the service of the one who wields the power. It's the lording over principle that Jesus talked about. And his disciples, that's all they have known. That's all human beings know. So when they think about him as the Messiah, as the King of Israel, how is he going to wield his power and establish his kingdom? It's by overcoming in a military way or in a triumphant way. My power is greater than your power. I crush you. And that's how now I establish my kingdom. And now I rule in this place of authority as I'm in charge, you're not. And Jesus is trying to get his disciples to understand, number one, God is inaugurating his kingdom through the greatest act of self-giving and self-humiliation. the sovereign God of the universe is going to establish his kingdom and conquer these powers that oppose him by letting them do their worst against him in and through his incarnate Son. Jesus yields himself to the powers and lets them kill him, lets them do their worst, and in that way, he conquers them. He becomes the King of Israel, as the placard says, by giving himself to the powers, not by riding in an army against them. And that's the way the kingdom is inaugurated, but that's the way the kingdom operates too. Jesus says, my kingdom is not of the sort that you think. I came, even though I am the Lord and the Christ, I came as one who serves, not as one who is served. And so it is to be with you. In my kingdom, the least is the greatest, and the servant is the master. That's how it works. So it's a totally different dynamic in which greatness and power and authority are determined by the use of those resources to serve the good of the other. In other words, it's a kingdom defined by love and self-giving. That's how power and authority, dominion operate in God's kingdom. That's the crucial point, I think, that is the takeaway here. And Jesus was trying to get the people of Israel to understand that's what he had come, that's the kind of kingdom he'd come to inaugurate. That's the sort of king he was. And so when they were expecting him to be the kind of king that they wanted, he refused. In the Gospels, it says, when he's doing these works of powers, they came and they were going to coronate him and take him and make him king by force. This is the Messiah. So we're going to take him and make him the king and help him to raise an army to ride against Rome. And it says Jesus refused. He turned away from that. And in fact, he told the people of his own generation that if you think that's what this is about, if that's what you think God's kingdom is about, if that's the sort of triumph that you insist upon, in other words, if you insist on leading an insurrection against Rome, riding against Roman occupation, overthrowing the conquering, subjecting power in that way, it ain't going to go well for you. You try to establish the kingdom in that way. That's not what my kingdom is. That's not the kingdom God's been promising. And in fact, Rome is going to crush you when you do that. And that's, as we'll see, what ultimately ended up happening. The destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD was that verdict of God against the people of Israel. This is not what you're trying to do here, is not my kingdom. And in fact, you've refused my king, and you've refused the kingdom that he came to inaugurate, which he inaugurated through his death and took his throne through his resurrection. So these are the ideas that I think are so important in understanding this thing of conflict, the kingdom that Jesus came to bring and how it stands in conflict with the kingdoms of this world and the rulers of this world and the dark powers, the deceivers that are behind those world powers.
Indeed. Well said, Kit. We sincerely hope this time you share with us has been profitable. Once again, don't forget to check out our website and subscribe to our YouTube podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us for our next episode. For Kit, I'm Faran, and we'll see you down the road. Kit, sorry about the tech issue.